What are the leadership secrets of someone who runs a global company with 41 offices around the world, with more than 1,500 employees, and has written several books which were translated into 30 languages? Do leadership differently. This is a research project for my work with my clients. It's about leadership innovation and focuses on high performers in a highly intense environment, the kind of leaders who know how to perform at peak performance, take care of their own well-being, but are also strong creative problem solvers. These are the type of people I coach. Different is better than better. Deconstructing the best leaders in various industries can be of tremendous value to anyone who's seeking to be a better leader themselves. Hermann Simon grew up in a small village in West Germany and was an officer in the German Airforce. He holds not one, but 2 PhDs and is a professor. He had spent 3 years in the US as a visiting professor at MIT, Stanford, and Harvard. Today, Hermann is the CEO of Simon-Kucher and Partners. They have 41 offices around the world and over 1,500 employees. They are the leading company for price consulting on the planet. Hermann is also known for coining the term hidden champions, which describes mid-sized unknown global market leaders. These are companies that impact most of the world, but are lesser known to the public. Since 1983, he had a growing interest in the Far East and China in particular. And this week in China, they are opening a business school named for him. He's written and published 3 books, which were translated into a total of 30 languages, and is now completing his 4th book, which is about hidden champions. We discuss the things that make his consulting company unique. We talk about the difference between mission-oriented leadership and process-oriented leadership, and so much more. On this call, you could get a tiny taste of me coaching a leader of global magnitude. Enter Hermann Simon. Enjoy. Hello there.
Yeah, you did, yeah. Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you. How are you today?
I'm fine. You see, I especially dressed up for the meeting with you.
I wasn't prepared.
I just gave 2 introductory speeches. Next week, the Hermann Simon Business School will be inaugurated in China, and I recorded the speeches I give there. That's why I'm dressed up. Normally, I'm not sitting in my office with tie and white shirt.
That's perfect.
You have a very similar background. That's the Talmud on your side behind you.
That's right.
Where are you?
In Israel.
Yeah, in Israel, of course. Where?
Beit Shemesh. Are you familiar?
Beit Shemesh. No, I don't know where. I don't know it.
It's about half an hour outside of Jerusalem.
Yeah, yeah. And are your ancestors, since Brauner is a German-sounding name, are they from Germany or Austria?
Germany.
Yeah, yeah.
My
so when did they come to Israel?
My grandparents, they escaped just after Kristallnacht. They escaped Germany literally like the next day. They escaped
38.
Germany, and my grandfather was from Erfurt, and my grandmother was from Frankfurt am Main.
Yeah.
They did not know each other at that point, but they both escaped at the same time.
They met in Israel.
They met each other in England. They both escaped to England, and that's where they met. That's where they got married. They lived in Manchester for just under 2 years. They had 1 daughter there, and after that they moved to Boston in the United States, where my father was born. And my father.
And, did you know your grandparents?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Did you get some German from them, or did they speak English, or
they spoke mostly English? Yes, they spoke mostly English to my father and my aunt. But I grew up on the Stubelpeter.
Yeah,
I grew up on that, and I know a little bit of Yiddish. It's one of my pet peeves that I didn't learn enough Yiddish, although they spoke more German than Yiddish. They could have, it's a very similar language, of course, but their native language was German. Yeah. Although once they moved to the States, they spoke mostly English. So my father knows some German as well, but I know even less than him. So it didn't rub off.
It disappears. As I wrote, I can still count in Yiddish till 10. Olef, Beis, Kimmel, Dos, Wof, Suyet, Kes, Tesius. And the origin of that is I grew up in a small village in the western Eifel region, and before the war, the whole trade with cows and horses, etc., was in the hands of Jewish who lived in the county city, which it's a small town, 20,000 today, and it's said, I don't know whether it's proven, that they had the highest, percentage-wise, the highest Jewish population after Frankfurt am Main. And the synagogue was preserved. It was not destroyed. So today it's a cultural center, but all the Jews from there disappeared. Many left early enough, and we organized, I am a chairman of a foundation in the city. We organized a meeting of the former Jewish people of Wittlich in 1991, and about 70 people came. Of course, most of them were in around their 70s or 80s, but that was a very remarkable and touching experience for me. And they came from all countries, from the US, from Israel, from Argentina, but they didn't come back. It was a one-time visit. And this a very strange thing was, we speak a dialect in this region. And so these people came back, and most of them spoke this dialect, which I also can speak. And in our school, they were never mentioned, because our teachers were, of course, in the 50s, 60s, were people who were implicated from the Nazi time. So they didn't tell us anything about the Jewish population of Wittlich. Only a generation later, people did research, and we also established an institute named after the last chief of the Jewish community, Emil Frank. So I didn't experience any Jews personally, but the history of my region and the Jewish population there, I know very well. Yeah.
Are there any Jews where you live today? You live in Bonn, right?
I live in Bonn.
Right.
In Bonn, there is a synagogue and a small Jewish community, but they are not visible. The only person I have occasionally touch with is a photographer, and his father was already a famous photographer, and they are Jewish. Their name is Schafgans, which could be a typical name. Beyond that, I don't know Jews in Bonn. It's a very small community, and unlike in Berlin, where they had a big influx of people from Russia, this has not happened in Bonn as far as I can tell.
Right. Okay.
So I may actually know more Jews in Bonn without knowing that they are Jews. That can well be.
Yes. Without a doubt, that could be.
Yeah.
Wow. So first of all, thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure your insights are going to be invaluable. Now, in order to give some context to this call, if you don't mind giving a short, brief bio of yourself. You could start wherever you want and end where you are today.
I'm born in 1947, so just after the Second World War. And my parents actually met in Warsaw. Though they come from the western, both from the western part of Germany. Why in Warsaw? My mother was a nurse, and she was deployed to a hospital in Warsaw. And my father was a medic in the German armed forces. So they came back after the war. We had a little farm, really a very, very small farm where I grew up. And you can say this was like in the Middle Ages, no machine, only manual work, etc. The first tractors came only when I was 10 years old or so. Then more by chance, I got the opportunity to go to the high school, which was very unusual at that time. And my youth dream was to become a starfighter pilot, because in this region, there are many air bases, American, German air, so I saw the jets all the time, but I failed due to some eye problems, but still joined the Air Force and became officer there. then I studied economics in Bonn and Cologne and stayed in academia, got a PhD, and then we have a second PhD called Habilitation, which you have to write, to fulfill, to become a professor. I became a professor at the University of Bielefeld. Over the years, I spent about 3 years in the US at MIT, Stanford, and Harvard as a visiting professor. And I led the German Management Development Institute, an organization of large German companies, for 3 years. And there I tasted the blood of practice. So in '95, I left the university and founded, together with my first doctoral student, Kucher, Simon-Kucher and Partners, and led this company as a CEO for 15 years. And today we have 41 offices all over the world and over 1,500 employees, and are the global leader in price consulting. Pricing was my specialty during my academic time, and I simply applied the things which I developed then. The second hobby, for which I'm also well known, is hidden champions. These are mid-sized, unknown global market leaders, and the German economy, the backbone of the German economy, are hidden champions, companies which you do not know, but which are global market leader. Let me just give you one, a very modern one. LSTM, that stands for long short-term memory. This software is installed on more than 3 billion smartphones. It's the software behind Siri of the iPhone, Alexa of Amazon. It comes from Germany, but nobody knows that. Look at autonomous driving. 40% of all patents in the last 10 years come from Germany, but nobody knows it, because in the Tesla or so, you don't see that German technology is behind it. And in recent years, I have developed increasing interest in Asia and China. That was first inspired by a visiting professorship in Tokyo in 1983. And then in the last 20 years, I have been almost 100 times in China, and now they open next week a business school which is named after me. So wow. Especially the hidden champions concept is so popular in China. My books were sold more than 1 million times there, and every Chinese entrepreneur wants to become such a hidden champion, a global market leader. Yeah, that's, I have a family, married to Cecilia since 1973, so we will in 2 years have our golden wedding, as we call that in Germany.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, and we have 2 kids and 2 grandkids. My daughter is an entrepreneur with her own company in the education media business, and my son is a partner at McKinsey. Wow. He also got a PhD from Harvard. So amazing. That is my whole bio.
Okay, so it's quite impressive.
Oh yeah, it's more than I expected as a young boy in a small village.
Well, you're definitely a very humble person, and I appreciate that very much. I find that quite common in leaders such as yourself. They don't view themselves as others would view them.
Actually, on that, perhaps you understand that in German. In German, there is a word Eitelkeit, which is the opposite of humbleness, vanity. Eitelkeit. And I am from the Eifel, I said. And in a laudatory speech for the most famous German film actor, Mario Adorf, I coined the term Eifelkeit as opposite to Eitelkeit. Yeah. So this term is quite popular in the region now, Eifelkeit. That is because the people from our region are relatively down to earth and a little modest, yeah.
Well, that definitely resonates from you, and that speaks volume, because on the media or in popular knowledge, I'd say, when we see many leaders, the way they come off mostly, or some of them at least, are not necessarily the most humble. And someone has achieved, as someone who has achieved so much as you did, would fit kind of that category, and you are not. You are definitely on the humble side. So that
No,
is,
but I perceive or experience a very wide spectrum of leaders. One third your description applies, but the one third I would also say they are humble. They achieve a lot. They don't make a big fuss of themselves. They are aware that everything is temporary, especially if you look at large corporations. The average tenure is 6 years. So somebody who thinks that he or she is irreplaceable has a wrong perception of the world, I think, and of life.
right. So what would you say are your top 3 business or career successes that you are most proud of?
The top business success, besides the family, which is my most important success, obviously, is Simon-Kucher. My goal was to establish a company which will remain independent and is not taken over by a big guy. And we get an offer since 20 years, every week we get an offer by somebody who wants to buy us. Big consultancies, accounting firms, or whoever. And I established an ownership model practically from the very beginning, where I passed on shares very early to younger partners. And today we have 140 partners who own the company. Nobody has more than the highest. I'm actually the highest with 3.5%, and it's spread equally over the partner. And we have a model for the transition of the shares like a stock exchange, where we run a stock exchange on the internet once a year, and the senior partners can sell. They say how much they want to sell at a certain price. The junior partners can buy, and we get an intersection of the demand and supply curve, and so the company will remain independent. Because what happens to most consulting companies is that the owners keep as many shares as long as possible. Then all of a sudden they are 55 or 60. And if the company is successful, the younger partners can no longer buy it. It's too valuable. And I wanted to make sure not to maximize my own cash from the company, but to establish a structure which will survive and not being sold or whatever.
What was your primary drive to do that, to go in that direction, as opposed to making an exit or being bought out eventually?
Yeah, because why did I establish the company? Because I was not really satisfied with academic or theoretical research. So I wanted to apply what my models and ideas were. So I started very early with a practical application, and the goal with the company was, and there we had a similar attitude with Dr. Kucher and a second doctoral student who joined us a little later in the very early phase, Dr. Sebastian, to establish a company which will not experience the usual fate of these companies, that they are being sold. And you know why McKinsey and Boston and Bain exist? Because ultimately the founders gave the shares to the next partner generation at a nominal price or for nothing. So it was a gift to the next partner generation, which, however, means that the current partners cannot sell the company to the next generation. The enterprise value is never revealed or realized unless they would go public with the whole company, like Goldman Sachs did a couple of years ago. So my goal was, and I was aligned with my co-founders, to establish a company which survives. Of course, the main condition of survival is that you are profitable, you grow, etc. But this structural component is equally important in this business, because if you are swallowed by a big guy, you disappear, the identity, the culture get lost.
What do you do differently in business compared to most people?
I would say, if I talk of the company, that we are truly entrepreneurial, because the young partners have to invest a substantial amount, and they want to make sure that this value of their investment grows, that it's not destroyed, and that after 20 years, when they leave the company, that they have accumulated a certain wealth. This is the entrepreneurial model, where you do not only participate in the annual payout of dividends, but you build a company and you get a part of what you build back when you retire. So I think that makes us really different, and I think that is the driver of our growth. We are around $410 million now. Even last year we grew a little, and this year we are again very ambitious. And the driving force behind is that we have 140 entrepreneurs, fully engaged with their investment and fully engaged with their commitment.
Wow, that's fantastic. I love it. So you're basically, you're growing entrepreneurs within your company.
Yes, yes.
You're instilling
So
that.
you could say, my wife always says you never were a consultant, because I actually never directed a consulting project or something like this. But you could say I am or was a developer of entrepreneurs.
Amazing.
And this model with the internal stock exchange, etc., according to my knowledge, it's unique in the consulting industry. I don't know of any other company which has this model.
Right. That's fantastic. I love it. What would be the single most important lesson you have learned on your leadership journey?
I express that in a slogan from the Roman philosopher Seneca, per aspera ad astra. That means on rough roads to the stars. It's never a smooth ride. When we first entered into America, opened an office there, we started everywhere from zero, or in other countries, Japan. You have to accept failures, errors, etc. So it's a rough road. It's not a smooth road, but you never should lose the ambition and the view of the stars. I think that's my most important lesson. And the second very important lesson is the most difficult decision is to judge people. And there you also make errors. In many countries on cases, we tried with one person, we had to exchange him or her after 1 or 2 years, and sometimes it only worked with the third trial. So you cannot avoid making mistakes and err in judging people. It's very difficult. I have as many cases who disappointed me as cases who surprised me in a positive way, who achieved more than I had expected.
So what would be your advice in that case when someone who's in a similar position to yours approaching hiring or growing their company?
You have to try it. I have no advice to make sure that you avoid errors or.
So don't rely on your judgment.
Of course, you include your judgments. There are obvious cases which are not suitable for a certain job, but among the candidates which you consider suitable and fit, you will still have an error margin of 30–40%, I would say.
Wow.
Unavoidable for me. Maybe there are people who have the philosopher's stone in this aspect, but I don't think that this exists.
What is the hardest thing in business or in life that you have overcome, and what did you learn from that experience?
that's a good question. The hardest thing I have overcome. I mean, one point that's interesting, which comes immediately to my mind, is that I failed with my Ustream to become a starfighter pilot. I often cite that. So it was luck. As I said, I joined the Air Force. I even saw a starfighter crashing. So, and it was a very tough time. The mission of our fighter wing, 33 in the German Air Force, was to drop nuclear bombs on certain targets on the other side of the Iron Curtain. So it was a very tough time. That was a really hard nut to swallow when I was 19 years old. That and from hindsight, it was pure luck because so many people, pilots died. 290 jets of the German Air Force crashed and 116 pilots died. So I may not have been alive if I had made this career.
Wow. But it seems like you still take this with you as something, even though it has put you on this trajectory, it's still there.
Yeah. In terms of career or if you call that also business success,
life,
that was the biggest disappointment for me.
Wow. That's fascinating. Now, I know you've written several books and they've been translated to multiple languages, right?
30 altogether.
30.
We just made the 30s, yeah. It was Finnish. Finnish was the 30s. A book published.
You express yourself very well, and you don't hide your thoughts. But oftentimes, I find that there's still something else that doesn't come out. So what would be one truth that you've held back that you know the world needs to hear?
You announced that it will be an experience, the interview with you, and this is an interesting question. In public, I don't talk much about my private life, and this is I don't know whether it's that important, but for me, it's important. I have our old farmhouse, and it's only a little more than an hour from Bonn. And for instance, tomorrow I will go there and forget the world of industry, the global world. So I would say, I never said that, but for me, it's very important to have, I don't know a good English word for this. In German, I would say a Fluchtpunkt, a point where you can go and forget about all the hassle and the stress you have in your normal life. Perhaps for you, that's the Sabbath, or for some people, it's a monastery where they withdraw sometimes. Let me call it a point where you can, it's a local point. It's not meditation in your place where you usually live, a different world. So this is an important point for me. I go there, I speak with the people in the dialect, and am in a different world.
That's fascinating.
And I still like coming back to the business world after a few days. So I would not live permanently in the old world, but for a few days, this is very extremely important for me.
That resonates with me a lot, because one of the things that I help people with is a concept that I call harnessing the power of the void.
Of the void, yeah.
Yes, the void. We see it all around us. The way the world exists, there's this concept of void that when you notice, successful people oftentimes become successful partially because they notice a pattern. And then they utilize that pattern to their benefit. Now, what happens with some of those successful people is that they become jaded by the fact that they caught onto a pattern, but they don't realize that there's one level beneath the pattern, and that is the formula. And when you have the knowledge of the formula, you have the power to play around with the formula and potentially create new patterns that were never there. Some of them may be successful and some of them may fail, but at least you have that power in your control. So I want to share with you something that that I came across not too long ago, just a few years ago. And it struck me as something, I was very enlightened by this insight of this concept of the void. You see, when I ask people if they've ever baked bread, so I'll ask you, Herman, have you ever baked bread?
No, I haven't baked bread.
Okay.
But I just built a fountain for my grandson in a meadow where we have water there. So we dug a hole and I built a fountain, or I make such things. We harvest apples. We now are building a little pond, a pond to keep fish because he likes to fish, our 9-year-old grandson. So I'm doing things there very, very differently from what I doing in my daily life.
I love it.
Reading, writing, speaking, etc.
So
yeah.
When I ask people, typically men, what is the process of baking bread? So they're familiar with most of the process. They say to mix the ingredients, then you knead the dough, and then some of them who are not really familiar with the process, they say then you put the dough in the oven. But they forget one critical step. You need to let the dough rise.
Yeah.
And similarly, when a person wants to build muscle mass, so they go to the gym, they lift weights, and if you just continue lifting the weights, you'll never build your muscle, because what actually happens is while you're lifting the weights, you're tearing your muscle tissue. And it only grows bigger during resting period. So there are basically 3 steps to this pattern. That man has to introduce some form of effort. It could be time, energy, money, attention, whatever it is. And then the second step, sorry, is that you have to refrain from continuing to put in that form of effort. Mm-hmm. And the third step is you reintroduce the effort in some form, similar to the first one or different. Either way, the point is you reintroduce yourself. So when you're baking bread, you would think that once you knead the dough, you put it in the oven and complete the process. No, you have to hold yourself back, stop for a moment, let nature take its course, and then you reintroduce yourself. You're building muscle mass, you make the effort, you lift the weights, and then you have to stop. You have to rest and then continue again.
Yeah, I know, by the way, how to bake bread because we is that right? We baked our own bread when I was a child. We had a big stove which was heated by wood, and then my grandmother and my mother, until I was 10, we baked our own bread.
Amazing.
And we actually from our own corn, from our own rye and wheat. We lived solely. That's another interesting thing which I describe in my autobiography. We were virtually, literally made from the earth of our village, because everything which we consumed, with the exception maybe of pepper or salt, came from our farm. The eggs, the wheat, the flour, the meat, the milk, everything.
And this wasn't too long ago. This wasn't too long ago, I'm saying.
That was 60 years ago, yeah.
Within 60 years, look where we're living today.
Yeah, we consume everything from everywhere. We get kiwis from Israel, we get apples now from Chile, and things from everywhere. Mushrooms from Poland, tomatoes from Holland. So we are now made of the whole molecules from all over.
And that's what makes us become more one.
What this difference means, I don't know.
It's a
but the molecules are very, very different today from what they were 60 years ago in my case.
I must thank you for this brilliant insight I just had with what you said, that now that we are, if we believe that we are what we eat, and we're eating produce from different parts of the world, then we are becoming more one with each other than we ever were.
Absolutely. Physically, yes. I mean, our body is made of water, air, and what we eat. So, and what we eat is coming from all over the world today.
Amazing. Wow. So thank you for that insight. I never thought of it that way. So I appreciate
It's
that.
very, very simple. Yeah,
Yeah,
but it's
well,
true.
those are the most powerful insights. The
Yeah.
simple ones. I coach around insight. You see, the way it works is that initially life looks one way, and then you have the smallest insight, and your view changes ever so slightly, and your whole world shifts.
I share some of these insights in the last chapter of my autobiography on, I call it the school of life. And I hope you are not a jurist by education. One of the insights is avoid lawyers.
So that's interesting, because in the Talmud,
I minimize the cooperation. I mean, it's not always avoidable, but whenever it is avoided, lawyers make life only complicated.
So interestingly enough, in the Talmud, in the Mishnaic time from 2,000 years ago, there is a famous quote, which doesn't literally mean lawyers today, but it does say, don't be like the lawyers.
Yeah, that's the same.
And this is from 2,000 years ago. And we live upon that. So many Jews are lawyers.
If I had known that, I would have quoted it. I would have loved to quote it.
I'll send you the source.
Yeah, it's exactly the same meaning.
Yeah. I'll send you the source later. So thank you for that. So this idea of harnessing the power of the void is what I help some people do, especially these successful people who are chasing life. And sometimes actually life is chasing them, and they're not in full control. One of the tools that I give them is help them create these voids in their life.
Very important.
And there are many ways. It's like a three-dimensional concept. It could be a place that you go to. It could be time that you take off. It could be both. It could be in many different ways. But you have to embed those voids throughout your calendar. Every week and even daily, you should have moments of voids that you create. And part of the reason that this idea works is because the way the universe is that it doesn't like vacuum. When there's a vacuum, it has to be filled. So when you actively create a vacuum, you create a void, it has to be filled. So when it's eventually filled, the bond of both those sides that were supposed to be together initially are ever so stronger. That bond is ever so stronger. That's one of the reasons the void is so powerful.
Very interesting. There's an old habit in the Catholic Church. It's called exercitien, so literally translated exercises. You withdraw usually for 3 days. It's no longer practiced today, or by very few people only. So you withdraw to a monastery or a quiet environment, and you do not speak for 3 days.
Wow.
So it's silence for 3 days. I did that only once, actually, during my military times, and it's an interesting experience. Yeah. Maybe I should do it again someday.
It is. Actually, I'll share with you something interesting, because when it comes to coaching, which is what I do, I come with some baggage. I come with some knowledge and wisdom that sometimes I feel like I should be sharing, but that's usually not the job of the coach to do. Job of the coach to do is to let the person flourish from within themselves. So I can help guide them, but I can't be the one imposing my ideas, which may be right, onto the people I work with. So one of the challenges that people like myself have is that we have all these ideas running in our little brains, and we feel like we need to share them. So it's a little easy to control the sharing part, but we want to actively be listening deeply to our clients without all these thoughts running in our minds. So one of the tricks I learned from my coach is to literally bite your tongue while your client is speaking. Because when you're controlling your tongue physically, like biting it, not hard, just gently, and you could do it by closing your mouth, your thoughts slow down, because our mouth is connected to our thoughts. So when you control your mouth, your thoughts are limited. So it's a fascinating thing. And then your mind goes quiet, and then you could receive more of what your client is saying and projecting outwards, even between the lines.
It's very interesting. Yeah. For me, it would be especially valuable advice because I try to interrupt people and they bore me or I don't agree. Yeah. So biting your tongue. I will take that with me.
Try it, right? You could practice it like in your own home if you're like in the environment of family or close friends. The best way to do it is actually to literally stick out your tongue and hold it with your fingers. That has the strongest effect. You can't do that at a board meeting.
Yeah.
But you could, there are two other levels of doing it. Like I said, you could either bite the tip of your tongue gently, or if you feel like that's still visible to other people, you could stick the tip of your tongue towards the top of the palate of your mouth, and then close your mouth, and that works as well. The idea is that you're controlling your tongue as much as you can, and that slows your thoughts down, and then you're fully present.
Interesting.
It's a beautiful thing. So
I will try it.
Yeah, let me know how it goes. Hermann, how do you want to be remembered?
That's another interesting question. And I read a book recently on longevity by a famous Harvard researcher, David Sinclair. Lifespan is the title, and he was discussing, do we want to remember? Does it matter? Yes, I think it matters. And the question is, what does survive you? Books do survive you. So I think my books are a means with regard to the strive to be remembered.
My question isn't what, sorry to interrupt you. My question isn't what medium you're using in order to be remembered. It's what do you want to be remembered as? So you could be remembered as an author, as an entrepreneur. What is the impact, the imprint that you're leaving, the print you're leaving on this world?
Yeah. The title of my autobiography is Many Worlds. So I think this also applies to the answer. I would like to be remembered as an author. That's probably more with the hidden champions topic. Recently, I called it up in Google and 2.45 entries showed in Google when I put in. Sometimes it's a little, the number varies, but it's always more than 1.5 million hidden champions entries. And I coined this term 30 years ago. And I think also as long as Simon-Kucher and Partners survives, this is also the memory of an entrepreneur which could survive. Not for how long, I don't know. Nobody knows that. I don't think that somebody will remember me in 100 years, but maybe in 20 or 30 years. That's and the question is, why is it important for myself? And that's not an easy answer. But I would more important put value on if my children and grandchildren remember me as I remember my grandfather. I knew only my grandfather on the father's side, who lived on our farm. And though he died when I was 4 years old in an accident, I still have a very strong memory of him. Emotional memory, not details, but emotional memory. So that sometimes tears spill up when I think or have certain associations with how I remember him.
And that's how you want to be remembered by your...
I mean, I think the family part is anyway more important than the business part. So we have to distinguish these two areas. Yeah. But in the business world, I think the hidden champions idea is something I like. And so I never did real scientific research on it. I've written my fourth book on this, which will appear in German. It's actually has an interesting subtitle, Hidden Champions, Das neue Spiel im chinesischen Jahrhundert, Hidden Champions, the new game in the Chinese century. So it looks a lot at China, because I think they will be our biggest competitors. And yeah, I have a certain pride in the company, in this entrepreneurial role. That would also be good if that is a little remembered by the employees or by the environment.
Wow, that's amazing. What would you want to do if you knew you couldn't fail?
Maybe I would love to be able to sing. I am totally amusical and cannot sing. The only time when I sing is when I go hiking in my Eiffel forest and nobody is around, because when my wife hikes with me, she forbids me to sing. Or another ability I would like to have is to speak many languages. I've met people who speak 10 languages or so. At least I would love to speak the main European languages. As I mean, I have even in English, I have a strong German accent. I have given speeches in French, but I'm not really good, because even in France today, I speak always English. But I would love to speak a couple of languages.
I love languages too. I find it extremely important, because that bridges the connection, of course, with communication and with other cultures and other people. You get to do so much more. That's amazing. What are your top 2 or 3 superpowers?
Superpowers in terms of politics or economics?
No.
Or...
In terms of you as a leader, what makes you who you are as you show up? Your top 2 or 3 character traits.
Yeah. I think I can lead. And where does this come from? That's an interesting question. And I have some hypotheses on this. Of course, a part is probably genetic. But I grew up, and you notice I often refer to my first life in the village.
Yeah.
In our neighborhood, we had 6 boys in my age group within 2 years. And I was the oldest and the tallest of them. I always was the leader of this boy gang. Then, in the Air Force, I was put often into emergency situation at a very young age as an officer on duty. And that also contributed to leadership capabilities, because as a 20, 21-year-old, you never come into the situation that you have to lead a company of 120 people or so during NATO alarms related to the nuclear bombs I mentioned, etc., with very high security, etc. And as a student, I also was politically very active, and was elected as a leader at the University of Bonn. So I think these stages in my life, where as a young boy, as a young soldier, as a student, I practiced leadership or trained leadership, have been very important to develop this trait.
What is the specific thing within leadership that makes you who you are, makes you unique?
I delegate, and I trust people that they can, and that is actually a very interesting principle, which comes originally from the Prussian military. It's called mission-oriented leadership, as opposed to the American system, which is process-oriented leadership. In mission-oriented leadership, the leader gives the mission to the people who carry it out, but the leader is not allowed. That is the official system in the German armed force, and that was invented by the Prussians 150 years ago. is not allowed to prescribe the details. So I give the mission, occupy this mountain, to the squadron commander, as a battalion commander. I'm not allowed to tell him how to do that, to carry out this job. The process-oriented system is very different. There you analyze everything, you get all information you can get on your hands, and then you define a process. Like in the McDonald's manual, every step is prescribed by the manual, and then it's carried out. And there's a very interesting study actually by an Israeli military historian. I don't know whether you have ever heard his name, Martin van Krefeld. He was a professor of military history at Hebrew University. And he analyzed the fighting power, and the book is actually, has the title Fighting Power, between the German army and the American army. And he came to the conclusion that the fighting power of the German army was actually 52% higher. So they achieved with 100 people, and the Americans needed 152 people for the same job. And the reason he concluded, and I would not cite that if it were not from an Israeli, he concluded is that the cause is in this leadership principle, mission-oriented as opposed to process-oriented control. And it's also interesting, I mentioned my time in the Air Force. Our fighter wing 33 had about 36 fighter jets and 2,500 people. And in our neighborhood, there was and there is still the American 52nd fighter wing. They have about the same number of jets and 5,000 people. Because they need more people to analyze everything, to develop the process, and then to implement. And I think my leadership system is very clearly mission-oriented and not process. I don't want to control people, to prescribe them what they do. I give them a mission and let them do it then. And as I said, that can fail sometimes. Okay, that's unavoidable because you don't have the tight planning and control. But I am a fan of this system. And I have also confirmed that in my hidden champions. The hidden champions, these mid-sized global market leaders, have this mission-oriented, often not consciously. They have many less detailed processes, manuals, prescriptions, what the people who carry out a job have to do, should do. They leave it to them. Of course, this requires a certain level of qualification, of education, etc., that you can trust people that they execute the job well. So that was a lecture on my leadership.
No, that was great. You actually went into perfect detail. You zoomed in as much as possible, because my follow-up question is, what would you say are the dark sides of those superpowers? So of this delegation, of this system that you use?
Well, that you are sometimes disappointed, or you are even sometimes cheated. That has also happened, that people cheated me, stole money, or made dark things. Of course, if you trust people, you will sometimes be disappointed. You have to live with that. That's a hard lesson. But my reaction to it is not that you introduce more strict controls, details, processes with increasing size of the company. That's necessary to a certain degree, but I still try to minimize the bureaucracy, the controls, but then you have to accept these disappointments. Unavoidable. Everything has two sides.
Right. So the question is, what do you already answered this, but the question is, what do you do about the dark side? Because there are a few ways of going about dark sides. There's one way of, there are basically three stages, I would say. Stage number one is becoming aware of the dark side. Most people aren't even aware of the dark sides of their superpowers. So when I when I ask this question, they address it head on, they suddenly become aware of it. So that's step number one. Step number two is managing your dark side. And step number three is actually converting your dark side into your superpower. That's the highest level. And what you're doing is interesting, because you're saying, I'm fully aware. I know there's a price I'm paying, but there's nothing I can do or think I can do in order to look at it differently.
I could, of course, use your second method by introducing more strict controls, more detailed mission descriptions, etc. But that would take more time, and it would restrict the actions of the person who has to carry out the job.
But maybe there's a different...
And the third one is difficult for me. I tend to accept a certain failure rate.
But maybe there's a different way of looking at it. It's not necessarily either or, meaning there are only two ways to go about this. Maybe there's another way.
Yeah. One other way would be to point which we addressed already, to invest more time and effort into judging the people before you delegate, so that you reduce the error quote by not delegating a job to a person who is not able or not willing to carry it out properly. So that would be, but that would actually be a rational method, but I don't like it. So
could I suggest something?
Yeah, of course.
I think there are some people who do this, some organizations who want to really live into this realization that you should be hiring overlings and not underlings, right? So a lot of times when there's a leader to an organization, the people beneath the leader, which is everyone, they're afraid to make mistakes. Naturally so, it makes sense because of the repercussions. You could lose your job. There's certain types of mistakes that not only should be tolerated, but when they come from the right place, they should be appreciated. And to give you an example, I know of someone who sends little gifts, if it's flowers or chocolates, to his employees who make mistakes, sometimes even grave mistakes, because he wants them to not be afraid of making judgment on their own. And even when they fail and it costs everyone money and time, he wants them to feel like, okay, it's okay to it's not about okay to make mistakes. It's okay to make decisions, even if they may be the wrong ones.
Yeah, that's interesting. It would probably not be my style. The farthest I go or can go is not to say anything, not to reprimand. That's already a lot, I think. Going beyond that and sending them gifts for making mistakes in order to achieve this effect, that would be quite demanding on me. But it's very interesting.
It doesn't necessarily have to be coming from you per se, right? You could institute this into the organization and someone signs your name on it. It doesn't have to be really from you. Eventually people understand it's from you, but if you feel like you need to be a little detached because of the uncomfortable sensation you get from this idea, that's okay. I'm just saying that this is another way you could look at it, and that then you could not only just be aware of your dark side, but actually bring it into the good. And then eliminate it. There's no more dark side.
I have to think about it. About the biting the sun, I am decided that I will try it, and about this idea I have to think.
Okay, fair enough. So thank you very, very, very much for your precious time, Hermann, and your insights were absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, thank you. It was a very interesting discussion for me, and I learned a lot, and I hope we stay in touch.